Good morning. Sorry I couldn't be there this morning. I had to leave school a little early and I'm up in northwestern Montana. But thank you for being patient and watching this. Here is my presentation on Hyalite Drytooling. So Drytooling is ice climbing with no ice, and Hyalite has become one of the US hotspots for this emerging sports. And so you're using crampons, which are like spikes on your boots, and ice climbing tools, which are like curved axes, on rock. And so Hyalite has been really prevalent in the sport of ice climbing, which has undergone about 2 or 3 major changes. And right now, Drytooling is becoming more popular. And it's kind of becoming like that next step for ice climbing and really pushing those hard routes without having to take all the risks that you have to take on really hard ice climbs. So Hyalite has undergone a lot of development for this recently, and there have been a lot of new routes put up, and a lot of them are not described anywhere, and if they are, it's only written descriptions. And so I wanted to put all of these together into a map instead of just a written description, and so that was the aim of this project. In order to do this, I needed to map points on the cliffside at 1 to 2 meter accuracy, which was difficult due to the canyon walls and high signal to noise ratio, or a low signal to noise ratio. So I set an elevation mask of 30 degrees and averaged my points to try and overcome this. Here you can see one of the clearings where I would take points from, and I would find a spot that was open and had a view of the sky, and I would take offsets of all of the routes I could see using a Nikon forestry tool, and I would measure the height of each route. And I used descriptive locations as a field that I collected in order to tell which route was left to right in order to check my data in post-processing. And so the major features I mapped were the routes and the trails, and I included like the route, grade, name, protection, and length as fields. And for the trails, I didn't include anything special, but yeah. Moving on, so I mapped 2 main areas, which is the amphitheater in the bottom right of this and the unnamed wall on the left side. And on the unnamed wall, there's an area called Bingo Cave, where all of the routes are in this large cave. And it's pretty open, but it was still a challenge to map overhung rock routes. And so the offset was pretty central for that. And this area is home to the hardest Drytooling routes in Montana. And here you can see Katie Stylos climbing on Groggy on the Bering Strait, which is the hardest Drytooling route currently in Montana. And it's rated at a D13, which is very, very difficult. Here is my final copy. And so I created this as a trifold map. And here there's a little description with some information. And then opening it up, you get the entire map of this area of Hyalite, and it includes the names of the prevalent areas. And then down here, you get your first 2 insets of the map, and you get the amphitheater, and here is the unnamed left side. There's also a QR code to scan this, and you get a georeferenced PDF to use in Caltopo or Eventibooks. And so here's what that left side of the unnamed wall looks like. My cousin took this while we were out mapping together. I was lucky to have him join me. And then on the back side of that map, there's 3 more offsets which just show the rest of the unnamed wall, because it's really quite a long section. And so by having 3 separate zoomed in areas, made it much more navigable. One of my problems I ran into was I had about 100 points I had to offset. So I wrote some R code to do that for me. I think by the time I wrote the code, it ended up taking about the same amount of time, but I was very proud I could get it to work. My next problem is that I tried to do PPK, post-processing kinematics, on my data, but because I mapped in ARC field maps and not in MLID flow, that wasn't possible because field maps doesn't take the satellite geometry data. And next up, I ran into about 15 routes that weren't described anywhere, and I had to consult with local route developers and climbers to find out what they are. I only ended up including one of them in my finished product because I didn't want to direct people to unfinished climbs or projects that weren't done yet because they could have a lot of rockfall hazard or just other dangers because they haven't been fully cleaned and maybe lacking the right number of bolts or something along those lines. Here is my accuracy data, and my points I all got within 2 meters, but my lines, my trail specifically, I had a point that was, or a section of trail that had about 6 meter accuracy. And I think going back with RTK would remedy that, because I had to walk underneath some rock overhangs right against the cliff face in order to map the trails. And shooting offsets would have been very difficult here because it was a steep drop off on the other side. And so I really think RTK would help minimize this a little bit. Yeah, and for polygons, I was in 0.5 centimeter for all of my data. Yeah, one other challenge I ran into was on the far right of the unnamed wall. I stopped at the route Black Magic after a bunch of ice and rock fell down from the thaw. And so next year, I hope to go back and map further right on the unnamed wall. I want to map the Genesis area, which has about 7 routes, the Winter Dance area, which has like 5 to 10 routes, and then up at the Twin Falls area, which should have about 10 to 12 routes. Yeah, thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Feel free to email me with any questions. Thanks, and have a great day.